For more than 2 years, America's biggest economic story has been about one thing: inflation. Rising prices hit families, businesses, and policymakers all at once. Groceries, rent, energy, everything got more expensive. So the Federal Reserve stepped in with the fastest rate hikes in 40 years. It worked. Inflation cooled, prices stabilized, and the U.S. managed to avoid a full-blown recession. But here's the question almost no one is asking. What if inflation control is coming at the cost of innovation? Because while the U.S. economy looks stable on the surface, beneath it, something important may be slowing down: the creative risk-taking that drives progress. Let's start with what higher interest rates really do. When the Fed raises rates, borrowing becomes more expensive for everyone. Businesses pay more for loans, consumers pay more for credit, and investors become more cautious about where to put their money. That's how inflation gets tamed, by cooling demand. But that cooling effect doesn't just hit consumer spending, it hits innovation. Because innovation thrives on risk, and risk thrives on cheap capital. When money is expensive, investors pull back. Startups tighten budgets. Research projects get delayed. And companies shift their focus from what's next to what's safe. In other words, stability replaces boldness. We're already seeing signs of that shift. Venture capital investment in the U.S. has fallen sharply, down more than 40% from its 2021 peak. The number of new startups has dropped to its lowest level in nearly a decade. And IPO activity, the engine that funds innovation cycles, remains sluggish. It's not that ideas have disappeared, it's that the money to build them has. When borrowing costs 7% instead of 2%, even great ideas start looking too risky. And for small and mid-sized businesses, the backbone of American entrepreneurship, that's a problem. These are the companies that turn research into products, create jobs, and disrupt industries. But they're also the ones most sensitive to tight credit. When banks get cautious, these innovators get cut off first. Meanwhile, the biggest companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, are still spending. They can afford it. They have the cash reserves and borrowing power to keep investing through high rates. But that means the innovation landscape is tilting. Instead of thousands of startups experimenting in garages and labs across the country, a handful of giants now control the direction of progress. AI, cloud infrastructure, robotics, even clean tech. The big players are consolidating it all. That's not necessarily bad for efficiency, but it's bad for diversity of ideas. Because real breakthroughs, the kind that change industries, rarely come from companies trying to protect their dominance. They come from outsiders trying to challenge it. Another area feeling the squeeze is research and development. Corporate R&D budgets are still large in dollar terms, but the growth rate has slowed. Companies are being more selective, cutting long-term research to focus on short-term revenue-driven projects. In simpler terms, fewer moonshots, more maintenance. And universities, which rely heavily on federal grants and private donations, are seeing tighter budgets too. When inflation forces government agencies to focus on near-term economic goals, long-term scientific funding often gets deprioritized. That's how you end up with an economy that's stable, but stagnant. You can feel it in corporate language too. A few years ago, every earnings call was filled with buzzwords like disruption, innovation, and transformation. Now it's all about efficiency, cost discipline, and capital optimization. The tone has shifted from building to balancing. That's not surprising. Companies are under pressure to show profitability in a higher rate world. But innovation isn't something you can pause and restart. It needs momentum, an ecosystem that rewards experimentation, failure, and bold ideas. Right now, that ecosystem feels like it's running on half speed. Some economists call this the innovation tax of monetary policy. It's invisible in the short term. You don't see it in GDP or inflation charts, but you feel it years later when fewer new companies exist, fewer patents are filed, and fewer technologies emerge. It's like cutting R&D to save costs. It looks smart today, but it robs you of tomorrow. And that's the trade-off the US may be quietly making right now. Short-term price stability in exchange for long-term creative slowdown. Of course, stability isn't bad. A steady economy gives investors confidence, helps workers plan, and keeps prices predictable. But the risk is that we mistake comfort for progress. Because economic calm isn't the same as economic dynamism. And the same policies that protect today's stability can unintentionally dull the edge that drives future growth. Innovation needs room to breathe, and right now, that room is getting smaller. So what can fix it? Not necessarily lower rates, but smarter incentives. Policies that reward research investment, grants that support early-stage innovation, tax credits that make risk-taking a little less risky. Because America's long-term strength has never come from playing it safe. It's come from betting on what's next and being willing to fail to get there. So yes, inflation is under control, the system feels stable again. But if stability becomes the goal instead of the foundation, we may wake up a few years from now with fewer startups, fewer breakthroughs, and a slower, less imaginative economy. The Fed may have saved the economy from overheating, but in the process, it might be cooling the very spark that made it extraordinary. Because innovation isn't born from comfort. It's born from momentum, risk, and imagination. And the question for America now isn't just whether we've beaten inflation. It's whether we've slowed down the very creativity that built the modern world.